Mr. Dipple.
Sir, can I ask you about the microbrewery actually first?
Sure.
Where did that idea come from? So, it didn't seem to percolate up through the committees.
I don't know. That's a good answer. I don't know. It's actually a great example of the city being really, really responsive. The provincial government changed some regulations over the course of the last year. I know that the city had a meeting with microbrewery stakeholders in February, and here we are debating the bylaw change in May. Given the requirement to advertise for a certain number of weeks, that's about as fast as you could possibly do it. So I'm very happy to see this thing coming forward. I think it'll give people a lot of choice.
What potential do you think there is?
Well, the idea here is, I'm going to speak out of turn here, and it's probably better to speak to an expert. But the idea here is that we always allowed microbreweries that sold in their own restaurant, but larger breweries that wanted to sell retail had to only be in industrial areas. And the idea here is that a microbrewery can sell in its own restaurant and retail in a larger section of areas.
Okay. And
What about in the neighborhood?
Well, certainly if you have a neighborhood that, for example, has your neighborhood pub, your local on the corner, this might give them the opportunity to do some brewing there as well. We're getting into some technical details that I don't really know enough about, but I think that's the idea.
shall we talk about the pedestrian strategy?
Sure. I know about that.
Okay.
You're asking the guy who doesn't drink about the microbrewery regulations.
But you're still the mayor.
Still the mayor.
In terms of the pedestrian strategy, it doesn't matter if council actually comes up with an actual speed limit number at this point.
No, the recommendation from committee is to do a little more community consultation on this question. In my mind, I would be in favor of making this change if the provincial government allows us to do it without signage. So in other words, if we could actually say that everywhere it's not signed is 40 and not 50 the way it is now, I think the challenge of putting signs on every single residential road and cul-de-sac is a bridge too far for me. That said, what's really interesting about the research here, a lot of people say, if you're going to lower it to 40 or 30, why not just lower it to 0? Well, that is a reductio ad absurdum comments, because you're not going to lower it to 0. But the most interesting thing about this is that if you look at the S-curve of when people are badly injured or when people die, it actually bottoms out right at 30, so right around 30. So in fact, you get almost all of the benefits of a 20 kilometer an hour speed, for example, at 30 kilometers an hour. 40 is about halfway up the S-curve, and 50 is at the top of the S-curve, meaning to say that almost as many people get hurt at 50 or get killed at 50 or 60 as get killed at much higher speeds. So getting that point on that curve right is very important. Wasn't that fun without a visual? Just me trying
The
to explain that.
argument used by some is that unfortunately you don't have the data showing that the injuries and fatalities that have occurred on Calgary streets are due to that speed.
Well, I think that what we're really talking about is when you look at a Vision Zero kind of strategy, it doesn't mean there won't be any car accidents or there won't be any fatalities. It means that's your goal. And so you really have to trade off the costs and benefits of this. We get more complaints about speeding through neighborhoods than pretty much anything else except dandelions in the city. And when I look at the report, you'll see that they looked at a big, long commute from Hawkwood to somewhere in South Calgary, a commute from Acadia to downtown. And in each case, the change here would add about 30 seconds to the person's commute. And so we're not saying that that's going to prevent all accidents. We are saying if you do hit somebody, it's much better that they live. And is that worth an extra 30 seconds on your commute?
That S-curve is based on when cars hit people at certain speeds. Though we have a much higher rate of people getting hit at 50 or 40 now because that's the speed limit. Right?
That's right.
If you lowered the speed limit, don't you create a risk compensation issue with pedestrians taking greater risks because it's public safety?
I don't think so. I don't think anybody really wants to get hit by a car. And I think that the vast majority of pedestrian fatalities, pedestrians actually have the right of way. Now that doesn't mean you shouldn't stop and look and be careful. But I don't think any parent would say, honey, don't stop and look both ways because they're only going 30. Right?
Are we confusing speeding with speed in many of these cases? Though, when you say the biggest complaint you get is people speeding in neighborhoods, lowering the speed limit won't prevent speeders. It'll just lower people who are law-abiding.
That's a fair question. But we do find that the psychology of this is very well defined. Even if you're going to speed, there are certain psychological limits over the speed limit that you speed. So, people may think going 10 over the limit is okay, and 20 is really excessive, and 30 they would never ever do. And when the speed limit is lower, they actually go slower. So when people are going at 65 or 70 in a 50 zone, those same people would not go the same speed in a playground zone.
The public consultation process will take about 6 months if you go to that level. So, why are we spending so much time on this? Is it because it involves a fundamental change in behavior?
It's a big change for people, right? It's a big change that'll impact every Calgarian who drives and every Calgarian that walks. Now, I think that the folks who created the pedestrian strategy have done a really good job of public consultation. And in fact, just today, this whole issue in the Hamptons had very little to do with their secondary suite. It had everything to do with a neighborhood that's not designed for pedestrian, cyclists, or drivers particularly well. And so getting that right is something that impacts everybody. So I'm happy to have more conversation about it. I will tell you that although I don't get that many complaints about it, every councillor will tell you that the number one issue at every community meeting is about speed in their neighborhoods. All right, thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Mayor.